Welcome to Getting Ghosted. This is an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast, and I'm your host, Allie Horner. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm excited to do some more channeling about everything telepathy. It's just been such a whirlwind, talking about these experiences with the future humans and talking about just sharing all of the wonderful things that have been going on and things that I have been, comments and questions I've been receiving from people about it. It's been really fun. Of course, there's always people that are like, what do you mean future humans? What are we talking about here? And people who are always like, you never ask for the lottery numbers. And I'm like, man, really be original. Honestly, that's one of the most unoriginal comments that I ever see is ask for the lottery numbers. But in good fun. And there's been so much going on. That's just been such a good time. As I've been talking about this too, a lot of people have had really great questions. So today I did a little bit of additional channeling with them, and I wanted to bring through some answers to some of the things that people were asking as well for a little part two. So previously I had shared, that I had accidentally, unintentionally ended up meeting with these people from, 6,000 to almost 7,000 years in our future, and that they had popped in spontaneously during a meditation. And they had been sharing that they were communicating, entirely telepathically. I mentioned that they were smaller. They had really large eyes. They reminded me, though, it wasn't otherworldly. It wasn't abnormal. It just was, they said, everyone has the same skin color now. Everyone, has these larger eyes, etc. It was a really, really interesting episode, an interesting encounter for me. And so naturally, as I shared this on TikTok, people had questions. And one of the things I had shared is that, people were like, well, what do they think about our time period in history? And I was like, well, they don't really come back to talk about our time period in history. They just didn't have they didn't have much to say about it. And quite frankly, when I was in that space and in that meditative state, talking with them telepathically, I wasn't thinking to ask much about it. I was more curious about them. And it was the second I would start to even formulate a question in my mind, they already knew and were answering it, because that's how telepathy is. So it's that veil between you drops. And so I was reading through some of the comments when I shared this over video, and Leslie said, that's so valid. They don't want to come back to this time period, because I have no desire to go back to the medieval times to even visit if I could. And it's exactly for them, it's this time period is such a little blip in time. It's not actually, it's not actually a time period that they're that focused on. Because think about it, if they're that far in the future. Someone called Cloudy on TikTok had some great questions, and they said they're communicating telepathically, which in terms makes speaking obsolete, when they said true. And they said, but we do use our mouths. We do use sound, and we enjoy sound. They enjoy music. They hum. They really like to make harmonies. I kept seeing them braiding things and working on things, or sitting outdoors together and humming or listening to the sounds of nature. They also really enjoy live music and concerts. They enjoy using their hands for, different things. They play a lot of instruments. They love to carve. It looks very, very peaceful. They do have some really interesting, they were kind of trying to show me really high tech, and things like that. But that doesn't mean they're not still human. They are still human. They are still people, and they enjoy a lot of, the same entertainments that we do, just in a different way. And, I always think about things the banjo or the guitar or the drums. People have been using different variations of the drums for a really long time. And, things like guitars have really stood the test of time. And it became really clear to me that they love to have things really be simple, because they have higher forms and more in-depth forms of technology from what they were communicating with me. They like to have musical instruments. They love live concerts. They love live music, but they use sound really differently as well. Right now, what was made clear to me was that humans in our current time frame are really just scratching the surface in terms of what we understand about sound, light, and frequency and vibration, especially when it comes to things like sound healing and things like that. We are really just scratching the surface when we talk about how music can move us. And, anyone knows, you listen to really good music or you go to see live music, it really can shift your whole entire field. Like it really hits you in the head and the heart. You feel it in your body. It can totally change your mood. It can totally change what you're thinking about and how you're thinking that day. There's a lot of research around frequency and vibration and, sound as it produces vibration and all of these things. So they were showing me the crystal singing bowls and they said, really with these things, you're really just scratching the surface. And they said humans hadn't reached the frequency point or the dimensional change yet where they would really fully get benefit out of these things. And so right now, these things, they do matter for us a lot, but they're not doing what they could be doing per se. So they said we do love concerts, we love music, and they were showing a lot of our loved ones who we would say are like quote unquote on across the veil on the other side, in spirit, dead, etc. They have a very like when they come together and they enjoy live music and concerts and hum collectively and do things like that. Their loved ones who have fully transformed out of physical form come to join them, and they're very aware of that. I had the understanding that it's very societally known of and accepted for them because they are in a higher frequency. And I wouldn't say that they're in the spirit realm, but it's more like they have a little bit more crossover and are more aware, can talk to them more readily and things like that. So I thought that was like super, super interesting. Now keep in mind too, just like when we talk about like, things that we're seeing or receiving about the future from the future, not everything is set in stone. Sometimes like, I always think about the butterfly effect and like the time loop type of trippy stuff of like people like going to the future, finding something out, coming back with that information and realizing that they came back with it just to create that same future in the first place. And it's like, this happened, but that happened and this caused this, but then that came back and caused that. And that's how it was supposed to be anyways. I always think about Harry Potter where he's in the Prisoner of Azkaban episode or movie, and they ask him, how did you produce the Patronus chart? And he was like, well, I knew I could do it because I'd already done it. He realizes it wasn't his dad who produced it. It was him, spoiler alert, the whole time. It just looked like his dad because Harry looks like his dad. So like he was like, I knew I could do it the quote unquote second time because I had already seen myself do it. Like, and so that's what it feels like channeling these things. So for those of you who are like getting kind of mind fucked by this, feel free to protect your mental health and don't feel like you need to stay. Honestly, like I don't spend all my time thinking about this shit either. I kind of just go about my day and then I have a meditation and I'm like, whoa, dude. So it is pretty neat. But just again, know that again, like the future is, I always think about it like we are able to shape and change and move things. So not everything is set in stone. So maybe we're supposed to hear this to change something, or maybe we're supposed to hear it to have faith that there will be better things. I don't know. It's up to you. So kind of getting back down to it. The same person had said, so since speaking is obsolete, well, not necessarily like it's inefficient. They considered it inefficient. So they don't use spoken word all the time, but they do sing. They use their voices for other things. And this person asked, over time, do humans' mouths and bone structure get smaller? And overall, the humans in the future communicated with me immediately that they were smaller in general. Their whole, not just their heads, things like that. But it became clear to me, I felt like actually their heads were about the same size, if not a little bit bigger on top. But what became very clear to me was that many of these humans were actually smaller in height and width. They were very slender and relatively like petite, I would say. Now, in terms of their mouths and bone structure, I was just kind of tuning in again and saying, can any of you come in and chit chat on this? And I did see one like popping in, kind of flickering in and out here. Now, I'm not fully in meditative state or trance channel, but I will do my best to kind of bring them through as well. And we'll see kind of what happens here. And they said we don't need our incisors anymore. They're talking about not eating meat. They said it's more because of that. And they said, but overall, the jawbone structure, everything is relatively the same. But they said, other things have sort of shifted and changed, but it's not anything super duper profound. And they said, think about humans, 6,000 years ago from now. Like, there have been structural changes, but it's not like, super duper duper crazy, kind of like that. The other thing that they were showing me was they said there has been some shifting in terms of our vibration, frequency, and tone, and that has done a lot more than really anything else. They're showing me their eyes and their eyes being able to see more clearly. And they said also our sleep cycles are quite different. We don't need the same amount of rest because we're in a different frequency, energy, and vibration. And they're showing themselves sitting awake at night, like not needing the same amount of sleep. They said, so there are different things that have changed, but our bodies are evolving and adapting to it. And they said, now, when these things first began to happen, they said they were showing me years and years and years back. It was quite difficult for people to understand and discern what was happening. But as channeling begins to awaken and open on the planet, more and more people are able to receive insights and guidance, and more of these beings of higher light and power. And they're showing anything from, you could say spiritual guides, ancestors, loved ones on the other side, etc., began to come through and work with many scientists, and more and more of the scientists and people who work for social justice and change and policy began to band together and get these messages from the other side, and started to realize there were more and more of them receiving these downloads and messages. And it was almost like things popping in for people at the right time. And they said it decreased resistance from, knowing that we're all connected and that there isn't really death. But what also happened is many of them, as they got more and more of these messages, it helped them to prepare for some of the changes structurally that would be coming as a result of the changing frequency, energy, and vibration on the planet. And they said, now, this again did unfold over time. So it's not like an overnight thing. And they said often when we talk to humans about changes, they expect it to happen like this week, this month, this year. And that's just not how change happens. And they said there are events that change things like big time, but they're rare, right? So they want you guys to, they're showing like feet on the ground, like, keep those feet on the ground, because many of these things will not happen in our lifetimes, and they're going to take time. More of us are channeling. I do believe that, the other side's always working with us to help with things like this, but they keep showing me in terms of how the overall structure of the physical form changes that far out in the future. They said, we do work with light sources more. We work with energy and frequency and vibration more. But it's a lot of things that your current form, you do work with those things very well, but we're too in physical density to really, they're saying to handle the same amount that they're able to take in later. And they said now in terms of bone structure with their mouths and jaws, they said there's not too much structural change, at least besides they're showing me the incisors. There's no need for them, which is interesting. Singing and entertainment, we kind of went over. This person was asking about that. They said, how are they communicating through devices if we're still using them? And they said, well, we do have technology for these things, but it's not really the same types of things as you might expect. They're showing bracelets and things in the skin. They said, again, because we're telepathically communicating, there isn't as much of a need for this type of technology, though many of us still might enjoy it. So it is productive, but they were showing me they don't need these types of things. And I was asking them, so like, are you talking to me now, are you still in that 6,000 to 7,000 years out in the future? And they said, yes, I am. And they said, but we have a little bit more capacity to look inside and out of time to allow past, present, and future to inform each other. And I was like, that's chirpy. And they kind of like just smiled at me. Now, some of the other comments on these videos was, I was talking about the telepathic communication and how they fully use telepathy. And of course, there were a lot of comments on that. BK said, I don't want everyone to know what I am thinking. Like, why would we want them to do this? And there were people who were like, wait, so like, Jack said, so there is no privacy or private thoughts, feelings, or emotions in the future. So there is definitely some people had a little bit of like a hang up around it. One person was like, wait, so is there no lying in the future? And so essentially, really, when you have telepathic communication and connection, no, there isn't. And, I actually channeled one of my guides on this recently too, and wrote a lengthy article on Substack about it. If you want to go read that as well, my Substack is the Spirit Speaker 25, just the same as TikTok and everything else. But there, essentially one of the things they kept saying was, well, we do honor each other's privacy, but essentially we're aware of our collectivity. So we don't necessarily feel that we need such deep levels of privacy, but we also are able to honor each other's boundaries. So if someone is like having a private moment or a certain feeling on a certain day, we honor that. We don't pry, like we just understand, and they said we also have much more psychic awareness in our time and space. It's not just about telepathy. You have to understand these abilities all fold in and lay on top of each other. They all come in at a certain frequency and energy level. And so for them, their psychic ability, telepathy, and mediumship all interlace and overlap, right? So, and energy work and things like that. It's a vibrational shift that it's like a key that unlocks many doors, right? So they kept saying, you're thinking about these things, for the people out there, you're thinking about these things separately. They're not separate. They actually all come together. And this is why we always say, I've explained a lot of times on this podcast, often when we see someone develop mediumship or work on mediumship, their psychic ability comes with it and telepathy comes with it. Often when we see someone work on intuition and psychic ability, they're like, well, I'm not really interested in mediumship. Like, it's going to come with it because they just kind of naturally do when you're working with those six senses and those energetic, that's a frequency change, a dimensional change. Those things start to come together because at that higher dimension, things are more blended, where there isn't as much of that definition and separation. Now, they understand that though, so they have an understanding of collectivity and sovereignty similar to the spirit world, but it's a little bit denser because they're not like out of the physical form yet. They're just aware of things being a little bit different for them, but it's not like they're completely leaving the physical form at that point in time, right? This many years in the future, they're still, human beings, but they just understand their energetic levels allow them to do things a little bit differently as well. So yeah, such a cool thing. But again, they did want to emphasize, they were like, well, we don't really have lying or secrets here necessarily, or people hiding things, because we understand collectively that impacts the whole. We understand that when one person is lying, even a white lie impacts, they were like, the whole would know about it and would feel the ripple in the frequency. So there is only truth and honesty and openness here. We find no value in secrecy and hiding things. We find no value. We see how those things hurt. And they said on Earth, what you all need to understand is many of your lower form thoughts will go away. So many of the things that you use to manipulate, control, fearmonger, etc., those things go away when you rise in vibration anyways. And we've talked about this with spirit as well. Like when we die and we leave the physical form, we leave those things behind, because those are things that exist in the physical world. When you no longer have a physical body to protect, then what is there really to be that worried about? So for many of these beings, what they were communicating, humans, so many years out in the future, what they communicated is, we no longer choose to lie about things, hide things, manipulate, control, etc. People would know anyways, first of all. And secondly, they said, so this was such a great analogy that actually one of my spirit guides gave me. He said, well, even if someone tried on that level and that vibration within a telepathic connection, right? He said, even if someone tried, it would be like trying to play hide and seek in a hotel room with only like 2 pieces of furniture to hide behind. He's like, you could try for the fun of it, but you're not really gonna be able to do that much. People would be like, oh, I wonder where she is. let's go see, and so he said it's really it's hard to describe, but like with telepathy, like, no, you do have like I said, the second I would think of a question, they would already be answering me. It was like we were completely open books. So every time you have a really strong telepathic connection, remember, it's a two-way street. So for them, these connections are two-way streets. And I said, like, so do you have moments where you can kind of like log off and just like, sit and like, do you guys like just like to like sit and read books and like, relax? They show themselves a lot like sitting outside, manipulating different things like water and air with energy, where you could actually see it. And it was very normal. Manipulating fire. They can play with different levels of density and energy and vibration. So like think about like airbender type of stuff. I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And they said, now we're just beginning to do these things. We're not like quite in this all the time, but they did say we like simplicity. And yes, we like to have silence. We understand, because we're telepathic beings, that like we are not run by thoughts all the time. We have a lot more silence than you do. And I went, oh my gosh. And they said, because you are so suppressive of emotions on your planet, because you're seemingly separate and you're in so much density, your emotions run the show and your minds make a lot of work out of that. And so you guys are run by collective energy, and which is full of thought in your essence and density and vibration. They said that is not how we work in the future. That is not how our lifetimes are. It's a lot more peaceful here. And they said, but when we need to communicate and reach each other, it's so much more peaceful. It's just very clear. And they said there's so much more clarity, and it's much more... they said it is very efficient. And I said, so what about like emotion? Like if someone has a feeling or an emotion about something, does everyone else know? Like if someone had a crush, would everyone know immediately? And they said, well, yes, people would know instantaneously. And they said, and it's okay to have crushes here. We understand that that's just energy in motion. And they said, but we are not run by lust. Your culture makes crushes and things like that into a much lower, denser frequency. It hangs on. They're showing like limerence and lust and stuff like that, and sexuality and attraction. They said, we understand attraction very differently. It is not an animalistic thing. For us, we understand it as an energetic form, tracing and connecting people who are meant to be connected anyhow. And I went, oh my gosh. And they said, yeah, because it's just an energy pull. It's just an energetic cord. And we understand that not all crushes, lushes, lust. They said we really don't experience lust and things like that to that degree anymore. It's too low of a vibration and density for us to entertain. And the second someone had that, we'd all know. So it's like those things kind of washed away from the collective energy. Like they were too low to be held. And so I was like, this is so fascinating, because my guides have talked to me about this with attraction, how often people are drawn to other people, and we're so conditioned to think it's always about chemical attraction and like, dating or romance or whatever, sleeping with each other, etc. And I'm like, no, it's just energy. Like we're misunderstanding. My guides taught me about this years ago, a long time ago. And I started to understand this, like this is something we are working on moving out of as a collective. It's an evolutionary cycle though. It's going to take a long time. And even in the spiritual woo-woo circles, I don't see a lot of people, evolving out of that yet or understanding that yet. And it's honestly very triggering for people sometimes when I mention it to them. But I always try to trust if their guides are ready to hear it. Now, I did ask them, so when you're talking about all of this and there's, these certain thought forms that are just too dense, and they said, yes, everything on the level of fear, control, manipulation, secrecy, lying, that does not come with you as you shift in vibration and frequency, even as a species. Like you can try, but like we would all know it would be immediately recognized, right? And I said, so how did that I was like, can you talk me through anything you know about how that process happened? Like, how did that evolutionary step occur? And they said, well, we can't get into the full mechanics of it. They said it would be far too long of a discussion. And they said much of your modern vocabulary can't, you don't have the vocabulary fully for what we're describing yet. And they said, but essentially what happened, they're showing me a group of people who essentially were trying very hard to stay in that energy. They were trying incredibly hard to stay in fear, manipulation, control, lots of lust and greed, etc. And so again, we're not painting sexuality as bad. We're not painting partnership or sex as itself as a bad thing. So just keep in mind, we're talking about like the obsessiveness, like the control mechanisms of romance, like the greed that comes in around possessing someone or lusting after someone without, knowing them or understanding them as a person or seeing them as a soul. Like, and they said these frequencies are very low because people are seen as just a body to be used. We don't operate that way in the future. And they said, we have very sacred unions. It's very different. It's a much higher form of love and honoring each other. We see each other as soul forms. We understand each other's past, present, and future. We understand the higher form of each other's beings. And they said, but there was a point in which they said a chasm started to form. It was not a war. And they said it was not a big violent thing. It was not a big war, but people who are more immersed in that, like again, lust, greed, control, manipulation, violence, they said all fear and separated type of, like they said, the 3D denser energies, right? People who were much more immersed in those things began to sort of wash out of society. And they said it kind of was a natural progression because essentially those people started to realize they said a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So essentially what happened is the larger collective just naturally hit a tipping point where everyone began to shift frequency, energy, and vibration to go higher and higher. And they said, and it started to feel for a while almost like oil and water. Like the two frequencies could not mix. They were just not the same thing. So one would just sit on top of the other one and they're right there next to each other, but they're not the same material. And they said, essentially with physics, that's kind of how it feels, but it's not quite the same, right? That's kind of how it operates. And so they said, essentially, this group of people who were doing these things sort of like got washed out of the collective system. Either they started to rise with us because they couldn't help it. Like they just started, like our collective energy was so strong in terms of higher vibration that they just sort of naturally got pulled upward. So their own like densities started to, like they said, again, you have to remember this is over years and years of evolutionary cycle, but it's sort of as like their genetics changed, the way their bodies and minds changed. As each time like new generations were born, they were born into higher and higher frequency and density, where it began to shift and change over time. And then they were showing me, in addition, that there was a time period where many people who were still stuck in that energy began to kind of almost like, I guess, essentially die out. And they said, yeah, because that's what the physical form does. It's temporary. The soul is eternal, but the physical form, the body is temporary. So these people kind of started to just, become less and less naturally over the years. And I was like, oh, okay. And they said, now we understand in your current time frame, you want to understand how long is it going to be before that happens. And they said, we regret to inform you it will not happen in your lifetimes, which you already know, like logically. And they said, but, years and years from now, it is very likely, still like, and they keep saying in terms of their history with humanity, that this will be the case. So we don't need to be, they said, you're an important part of the evolutionary cycle. And we do want you to understand that about yourselves from your current time period on Earth, because you think you're all alone and separate. That's what that 3D energy is. It makes you think that, like when you're in 3D, in the third dimension, it's all about time and space. Like you are there having that physical experience. And they keep saying and showing me now, as we shift into fourth and fifth dimension and we're all living in it more and more, we will still have a physical experience, but there will not be that fear frequency that will be as pervasive. They said, so again, like you begin to start to move away from some of those lower forms of thought and energy. So they said, again, in essence, when it comes to the telepathic connection, which we all have, you mustn't worry because there is no like lower thought form that could be picked up with that. And even if it was, it's almost like the rest of it would naturally scrub it out, like without even trying, without shame, without fear, without like, oh, you're a bad person, we picked up on a bad thought. Like they're like, they were kind of giggling, like we don't really think about things in that way. We understand the humanness of things. So they said, so when many of you are like, well, I don't want everyone to know what I'm thinking, they said, well, we would ask you then, why? What are you thinking that's so bad that you'd be worried about other people happening it? Other people hearing it. This only shows you in your current time frame how human you are and where your growth is, and where you might give yourselves more compassion for being part of the current collective of consciousness that came there. They said to err is human. So they look at our current time period as very, like, with a lot of compassion when they look at us from the future. And I asked them, I said, so you seem like a lot of the perspectives you have there seem similar to what my spirit guides have said. And they said, well, yes, spirit is very much able to reach our dimensional reality much more easier than yours. So we have come up enough where we think a lot more like how spirit does and how the guides do than we would 3D people. And I went, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And they said, yes, because we've been lifting out of that. And they said, now we still have a death process here. It's just not quite the same. And they said, we can actually walk in and out of our physical forms at will and at choice. We do not see that as a huge separation of, oh my God, they're gone. Where did they go? We have a better understanding of how the physical form is meant to be used, and we still enjoy it, but we're in a higher frequency within it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's so neat. And they said, and you would see people there they said, humans here are unable to do this now, but there are people there who are working on ways for higher beings to come down into form. And they said, you might know them as angels, but they are able to come down and in certain moments, complete a physical action or take a physical form for a split second, but it takes a lot of energy for them to be able to do that, to come all the way down into your density. They said eventually the human race is meant to evolve in such a way where it will not take spirits or guides or angels or those who are in the soul form so much to come to greet us, because they don't have to fully work that hard. We will be lifted up a little bit on our own. And they said, we think about spirits also not as the dead, but as those who are in the natural energetic form. We don't really see it as much as the life and death cycle. It's not such a negative thing here. We understand a larger evolutionary process that's happening. And I was like, okay, this is really neat. This makes a lot more sense. It's just super, super cool. Let me see if I can find some more comments. Okay, so Sarah Treadwell, I love this comment. She commented and said, I love this so much. I received a bunch of messages about how special this time right now is, that we can have our own thoughts, that we can struggle to communicate is actually not going to be forever, and that we could hold the beauty in that we can have our own inner world and be misunderstood is a unique experience that we could be enjoying. More is a message I've received from spirit. I think she meant to say that is a message I've received from spirit. That's exactly it. And that's like kind of the gist of things, that as well as that we will eventually be more, interconnected and aware of our interconnectedness. Right now we have in our 3D a really unique time period. It's a lengthy one so far, but we're in a unique time where we are going to see and have been seeing the beginnings of this psychic spiritual phenomenon, coming back online more and more after, some time periods, at least for many people in many cultures, where it's almost been like a dark ages for us. We're kind of coming out of that, and we're having more and more of this awareness of our, as we shift energetically, frequency, vibration, dimensionally, we will have more and more of our, higher senses and psychic abilities and telepathic knowledge and connection come back online. We will have more mediumship happening. We'll have more sensitivity happening. We will have more clairvoyance and people seeing things and seeing auras and, people hearing things and feeling things and sensing things and talking to people from different time periods and more past life, awareness. And we're going to have more of that type of stuff. So that interconnectedness opens all those doors, right? So it is really a beautiful time and we should really be honoring and enjoying what we can from our current physical experience, because it's not always going to be this way. And a lot of these things will take time to evolve. But for those of us who are already working with these psychic and, fourth dimensional, fifth, I don't like to always talk about dimension, but these types of abilities, it really is important that we remember that we're here to just enjoy this physical experience. Okay, Katie Lee asked, she said, I'd be curious as to how the concept of government has changed. Is there any need to have laws if they all intuitively understand it, and if the idea of nations still exists? And she said, highly doubt it. So I did ask them to come back in and kind of speak on this, and they said, we have kind of councils. They said, there's been many civilizations throughout humanity that have really adhered to strict policies, procedures. There's been fights over rights and democracies and republics and fascism and, dictatorships and monarchies. And they're showing all these different iterations of the way that things have worked throughout the centuries. And they said, so essentially how things have evolved, and they were like, we won't get into all the mechanics, but at our vibration and frequency, we can have councils, and we do have councils. They said, we more so come together, and they said, we work very closely with our teams of light. We work more closely with the other side we simply call them higher dimensional essences and beings. We don't really need to work with more government procedures and processes, again, because they said there's no policing system here, for example. That's not needed or necessary. They said, we also have understanding of things that is deeper than what humanity can fathom now. So there, in essence, is no need for a governmental procedure or process. They said, now we do have people here in our future timeframes who are very good at operational and mechanical type of things, very good with tech, very good with understanding how things flow, how to help things work. And they're really good builders, people who are very skilled craftsmen still, because again, they're still in a physical reality. It's just a different vibrational quality of it. And so they said, so we do still enjoy physical life. We do enjoy physical things. It's just different in terms of how it's put together, how it's constructed, why it's constructed. And so all the systems and things that operate that, they said there's much more flow and ease with things. We also have an understanding of, for example, if there's, for example, no one has to do certain jobs or work, they're showing me, no one has to do things a certain way. So there, in essence, isn't a caste or a class system to the way there is here. And they said, because that would be too painful collectively to allow systems of oppression to continue to exist, for example. So they said, in essence, no, we don't really have as much of things like that, but we do have councils of elders. Those councils of elders, though, can't be corrupt citizens because they are telepathically connected to all of us. So our feelings and thoughts about them would be known to them immediately, and whether or not they're abiding by, what's highest and best for the self and for all would be known to us immediately. And they would be unable to retain those positions. I was like, so is there no longer a hierarchical or patriarchal process? And they kind of laughed at me, and they were like, no, that doesn't exist in the future. And they said warfare and those types of things are no longer needed. And they said they weren't needed in the first place, but for the thoughts of a few men who wanted to have power or land rights, things like that, access to certain natural resources. And they said, but in our future, we have no need for certain resources anymore. They're not of this earth. What we do use is of higher energy and mechanics. We no longer need things like oil. For example, we're no longer looking for things like limestone. And they said they're kind of looking at an old cell phone, they said a relic, and they're just and they toss it to the side. They said we have no need for these things. And the resources that are finite and natural and really unique to the planet, we all understand intrinsically to protect them. So, for example, there's no need for a climate army or any of that. And they said, no, that doesn't exist in your current time frame in our past. And they said, we do want you to have faith that your planet will long survive anything that you do to it. It's going to be okay. And they said the planet will regenerate herself as she's meant to do. There is no need to really fear around that, because there were some questions in the comment series about that. But they said, in essence, no, we don't need to have a hierarchical structure. We understand that that hurts more than helps, and that would only blind us to our own true essences, our own true devices. We honor one another, simply as is our nature in the future of humanity. So I found that to be really, really beautiful and really wonderful as well. They said also, we find the cares and worries of your world, where you're so worried about being at war with each other, fear mongering. We find those dimensionally out of sorts. Like, we understand what you're doing, but we see how frivolous. We find them frivolous. They kind of said, we understand that might sound harsh, but you do need to see how frivolous it is to believe in war and fear and control dynamics. And they said, there are many books and teachers in your time period who are just beginning to scratch the surface of what's possible for humanity. And they said, you would call them channelers. We simply call them light bringers. That is a unique position they have here. But we are all able to access the counsels of light here and to access intuitively what's really truly highest and best for self and all. We do not see what's highest and best for one as different from what would be highest and best for all. Because if you're doing something that's truly intuitively highest and best, it truly does benefit and has a positive ripple effect. They said, we feel that more because we are in a shifted dimension where we see it. For those of you who are very sensitive in your time period, you feel it. You can see it in someone's aura or energetic field. You can feel something good around them. They said, but in our time period, it's an immediate knowing. There is no other alternative. And they said, we do have free will choice, but we simply don't use our choice inadequately anymore. And they used the word inadequately, and they said, or you could say inaccurately. You in your time period have a very unique time where you can use free will inaccurately. And they said, that's what we would call it. We would call it frivolous. And they said, not that free will is, but that we're using it the way that we are. And they said, but there is no true love and connection without freedom. That is why free will is allowed. That is why choice is always part of the process. And they said, once you begin to understand how to use choice more accurately, you will have all of the things you want on earth. And they said, and not things like this. And they're showing piles of money and books, or like fancy clothes and cars. And they were kind of like, we understand again, from your time period in history, what is going on with humanity's evolutionary processes. We know this intrinsically as part of our knowledge, but we also understand that you are not meant to stay that way. And it will be that way for some centuries to come for you. But they said, essentially, they all get to the point where it's interesting because all the visions they keep showing me remind me, it reminds me of Hobbiton. Like, it's kind of, and it's like a mix between maybe a little bit of solar punk and Hobbiton. Solar punk type of stuff honestly feels too industrialized even compared to this. And I know it's meant to be very green and stuff like that. But even that feels like, they said, oh yes, we had things more similar to that 2,000 years ago or so. And they said, but we have even evolved even more out of that. And I was like, yes, you don't need that degree of technology, even as in the solar punk like demonstrations or ideas. And they said, no, we don't need that degree of technological advancement anymore. And they said, your humanity is obsessed with undermining itself. In the future of humanity, we see no benefit to that because, again, there's not the same amount of separation. So there's no more hierarchy. There's no need for currency. There's no scarcity mindset because there's no scarceness of resources when you work more in energy than you do with only material. And they said, and so there's no need for people to rely only on these physical prosperity type of things, and they did air quotes, and they said we don't need these things in the same way. And I said, so then what do you do with physical possessions? Like, how do you understand them? And they said, well, for us, we still have them, but there is not the same comparison of form that you have. And they said, we don't need to do that. Like, that's just not of interest to us. It feels very low vibrational in terms of thought. And I was like, wow, that's so fascinating. That's so interesting. And I said, so in terms of like work and jobs and stuff like that, how do you spend time? And they said, oh, we indeed enjoy different forms of work. And they said, but we see it as play. We would never choose a form of work that makes us feel heavy, drained, or bad. We understand that impacts the whole. And they did tap their finger to their nose, like on the nose, because I said, oh my God, my guides have been telling me this. I have been guiding people around this and getting the same message for over 10 years in readings for people. And I have put it online and blah, blah, blah. And people were always like, that's delusional. Like, people have to work. And I was like, I don't think you understand the difference between have to work and choosing, like, at least choose work that's like vibrationally or energetically a step more toward, hey, you know what? Even if it's only for a little while, I could wake up in the morning and feel enthusiasm about this. This is a challenge, but it's a challenge I enjoy. And they said, exactly. We have different forms of work, and we have different people who enjoy different things here. And we do not want anyone doing anything they don't find enthusiasm, fulfillment, or enjoyment from, because we understand the energy of the person is more important than any physical production they could possibly have or physical advancement with their work. They said it is the same where in your time period. And they said, but there are only so many channelers who are getting this message and understanding what it means. And they said, truly on your planet, your energy is the greatest resource, as you have said to many people. But many people do not understand this. They simply cannot wrap their heads around that. They do not understand that everything is energy, and that energy is the resource that those in power truly seek. They're not going to live forever in their physical forms. It won't matter anyways. Like, they will move out of the cycle, that life cycle anyways. But they said, for many of you who are there currently, you must begin to understand that you are part of the evolutionary process from which we came. And so they said, many of us were incarnated on Earth during your human lifetimes. So when we speak to some of you will find that this is very resonant for some reason, even if you've never heard it before. Some of you will find you've already thought things like this in the past, and you'll be like, oh my God, I've had this same exact download, the same exact thought. And they said, that would be us, because we were alive as some of you, or as people around you, during your lifetimes. So we are essentially giving messages back to our previous selves. And they went, huh. And so they said, but for some of you, we are simply coming as guides, where, we were not incarnated as you or near you or anything like that. At least not, they said, well, it's not as linear to us. And I said, yes, I get it. I get you. They said, we don't want to get into that whole chestnut, and they were like, as you would say, Allie. I was like, I love that. I love that they can like read like how I might phrase things or how I state things sometimes. And they flashed Austin Powers for me, because that's what I referenced that from. But they said, we do want you guys to understand, you humans there, that we are truly not trying to influence you for any bad reason. We want you to understand that you are beautiful, wonderful beings, that you have wonderful gifts to bestow on the earth, but you can't do any of this if you are drained, if you feel sick and sad, and much going on in your planet is making you sick and sad, but you are also choosing how you use your energy. Your energy is the greatest harvest for you. You must choose what seeds you're planting, and you must choose how you're going to use your precious time on earth. And they said, and we do not see it as, again, like, oh my God, or you're going to die or whatever. They said, we don't see it the same way. We see it as cycles, like the soul going through many incarnational cycles. And they said, simply because we're at a higher vibration, we understand things differently. And they said, it's not a higher vibration like, oh, we're at a higher vibration than you. It's more just, they said, it's just, we have a different understanding of how life cycles on earth work, and how death and birth work. So, and what it's for. So they said, we're simply a little bit more, they're much more matter of fact. I will say that. They do have humor, they do have fun, but they're more matter of fact. And so, yeah. Yeah, I think this feels like a good place to stop here. If you guys have questions about this, you are welcome to submit some more questions for the podcast. I know that this was kind of a longer episode about this, but yeah, it was so neat to call them back in and talk to them and to read some of your comments. And there were so many great comments. So many people were so enthusiastic about these future channelings. So I did create a super fun new way for you guys to submit audio messages for the podcast, where your audio message can be played, like a clip can be added to the podcast, where you can submit stories, questions, etc. It is going to be on my website, in the podcast page of my website. Just go over there. You will see a little button to click where it will take you over to that page, and you can record your audio question and or your little mini story for a future episode of the podcast. I know a couple people have asked about that, just because some people, they'll email in or they comment on things for the podcast. But some people are like, oh, I just wish I could just record an audio. I do better when I'm talking rather than trying to type it out. Totally get that. So I've been trying to find new ways for you guys to submit things. The old contact me form and email also still works. But you can also, use the little podcast recording thing on my website, and that'll be linked up in the show notes, or in the link tray for those of you guys who are finding this elsewhere. And then again, we do have some really fun stuff coming up, but I hope you guys will keep following along, because I'm really liking doing this series. I'll have to see if we can have some more come through. If you have questions, topic requests, stories that you want to share, signs, synchronicities, telepathic communications you've had, visions of the future, questions about things you're experiencing, guidance and advice you need, you can submit those in the podcast page in the show notes. Anyhow, thank you so much, everyone. I hope that you're enjoying these episodes so far. And make sure you jump into the Intuitive Soul Collective Patreon group and pop in there, because we're always sharing bonus episodes and little mini walk and talks and all sorts of classes and fun stuff in there. They also get first dibs on voting for future podcast episodes and topics. And their stories and submissions in terms of like questions to be answered on podcasts and all that stuff, they get first dibs on that. So come and join us in there. That'll be linked in the show notes as well. Thank you, everyone. Bye.